Hi there, my name is Mike Lloyd and I'm a member of the Pacific Northwest Basketball Officials Association out here in Seattle. And today I'm going to talk about the science of traveling. The rule for traveling is 4-44 and numerous casebook plays can be found at 4.44. The one thing I'll say about traveling is no matter what kind of name you give a move, whether it's the spin move, the Euro step, or the Australian two-step, if you replant the pivot foot, the move is now called traveling. All those moves can be made legally until they replant the pivot foot, and then those moves become a travel. There are two basic definitions of traveling. The first one is illegal foot movement while holding the ball, and the second one is touching the floor with anything but the hand or foot while holding the ball. There are several steps we use to determine traveling. We have to, in order and very quickly at times, determine when the player is either holding or has ended their dribble with the ball, determine the position of the feet when they are holding the ball, determine the pivot foot, determine if they have done a jump stop, which is jumping off of one foot and landing on both feet simultaneously, and then determine if the player has violated any of the restrictions on the pivot foot. And then the other part of traveling is determine if the player touches the floor with anything but the foot or the hand while they're holding the ball. When making that judgment, you have to determine was the player holding the ball before they got to the floor or after they got to the floor. So the first step in the traveling process is to determine, is the player holding the ball? I am holding the ball. Now I am not holding the ball. My dribble has ended. In all those cases, I am now holding the ball. All right, so a player gaining control of the ball while diving for the loose ball is covered in casebook play 4.44, 5A, B, and C. The thing to remember when a player gains control of the ball while on the floor is that if their momentum causes them to slide 5, 10, 15 feet, that is not a travel. They are allowed to slide if it's created by momentum. Once they are finished sliding, they can no longer roll over or stand up with the ball. If they try to stand up and lift the foot up and put it on the ground, that is traveling. If they roll over while holding the ball, once their momentum has stopped them, that is also traveling. And while on the floor, a player is allowed to start a dribble before they get up, as long as it won't be constituted as a second dribble. All right, so the next step in the process is determining the position of the feet when you're holding the ball or have ended the dribble. The position of the feet, if you think about it, can only be in one of three positions when you're holding the ball. They're either both feet up, both feet down, or one foot up and one foot down. All right, the next step is to determine which is the pivot foot. When both feet are on the floor, the first foot lifted and replanted is the pivot foot. The left foot is now the pivot foot. If both feet are off the floor when holding the ball, the first foot to land followed by the second foot, the first foot to land is now the pivot foot. If one foot is off the floor and one foot is on the floor when the player is holding the ball, when the next foot hits, the first foot down is the pivot foot, or the player may be holding the ball, jump off that first foot, and land on both feet simultaneously. In either case, after jumping off one foot and landing on both feet simultaneously, neither foot may be a pivot foot. So the player does the jump stop, catching the ball with both feet in the air, landing on one foot, and jumping off both feet and landing simultaneously. Again, the player may not pivot. If they pivot, lift a foot and replant it, that is a travel. All right, so and lastly, the player can never jump off of 2 feet and land on 2 feet. That is a travel. So once the pivot foot has been established, the restrictions on the pivot foot are that the pivot foot may be lifted to either pass or shoot. But the pivot foot may never be lifted to start a dribble. Travel. And then lastly, the player, when holding the ball, can only touch the ball, or can only touch the floor with the hand or a foot. If holding the ball and the knee goes down to the floor, that is traveling. So the big thing you should get out of traveling calls is just because it looks funny doesn't make it a travel. We have to go through the process of determine when the player is holding the ball, determine the position of the feet when holding the ball, determine the pivot foot, determine if they did a jump stop, and determine if they have legally or illegally moved the pivot foot. When talking to coaches or explaining traveling, we should never use the term steps. In high school, traveling is all about replanting the pivot foot. In the end, we need to make sure that we know the rule for traveling, that we don't split hairs out there when it comes to making travel calls, and finally, call the obvious travels. Thank you. I would love to thank Mike Saito, Chuck Arelli, Steve for their help. Thank you.